Hey everyone, welcome back to Colourful India, and it's so good to see you here today. We are back for another Therapy Thursday, and today I have my makeup already chosen, and the topic that we are going to be doing is the cycle of abuse. If you are interested in learning more about the cycle of abuse, then stay tuned. So before we begin the look, I want to show you the makeup that I'm choosing to feature today. This palette over here is the Pastel Garden palette, and it looks absolutely gorgeous. I've only used this palette once, but there's so many beautiful shimmers in here and pastel shades that I am dying to try out, so we're definitely going to be doing it in this video. The next palette that I'm testing out by Bella Beauty Bar is this one over here. It is called the Metamorphosis Palette, and I did buy this palette a while ago, but I never actually got around to using it, and I kind of feel like this would match so perfectly with Pastel Garden because it feels like a mini version almost in some ways. The only difference is there are no matte shades in this palette. It is mostly duochromes, and then we have these gorgeous chunky chrome shadows over here. So I'm pretty interested in seeing how these are going to look on my face, and again, I haven't actually used these palettes that much. The third palette that I want to feature is the Oracle Chrome Highlighter palette. It is absolutely gorgeous. The shades are so beautiful and so fascinating, and I can't wait to feature these in today's look. Last but not least, I will also be featuring my Woosh Beauty Fold Out Face palette. This is a makeup staple for me, and I can't wait to get into that. So without further ado, we're going to get into that tutorial and start talking about the cycle of abuse. I'm going to be going in with this shade first. The cycle of abuse was first documented by Lenore E. Walker. She was a psychologist, and this was around the 1970s, and she basically noticed that there were, these stages that were happening in domestic abuse cases. So there were 4 stages, which I'm going to walk you through, and then I'm going to talk to you about a little bit of the criticism to these stages, but why it's also so important, because this actually helped us to understand abuse. So basically in the cycle of abuse, there are 4 main stages. If you go and check online, you'll find different models and different cycles and all of that, but essentially it is these 4 main parts. So the very first thing is, according to Lenore E. Walker, the tension building. In the very first stage, the partner that is usually the one who's abusive, gets very irritable or tense. This may be due to external factors like, financial stuff or work stress or difficulties, that they're experiencing, or health challenges, whatever it is. They start to get more and more tense. The behaviors also start to become more frequent, and this is basically essential. And that's why it's called the tension building stage, because you have stress, tension. It's essentially building up, and it is building up to abuse. So the way these abusive behaviors are displayed in the tension building stage are essentially things like irritability, impatience. There may be verbal abuse or unkindness, being angry or short with their partners, or just having tempers. And essentially how this affects the victim is the victim ends up feeling like they're walking on eggshells. They start getting anxious. They start to feel very afraid and scared because they don't know what they're supposed to do at this stage. So because the non-abusive partner is now in a place where they know that something's not right and they can sense that the tension is building, they want to obviously de-escalate it, and they start to appease the partner and give in to them, even if it means that they take on all the blame, even if it isn't their fault. And that's basically because they feel like they're walking on eggshells and they're not in that safe space. And obviously the behaviors that are coming from the abusive partner are making them feel that way. So it's very much just to prevent the abuse from going further. You may draw parallels between this and even normal relationships, where you may find it very difficult, or where you feel like you're walking on eggshells with certain individuals in your life, and so you give in to them because you don't want like a confrontation, you don't want to fight, you don't want to you just don't want to go to a bad place with that person, and maybe you also value the relationship. So it's kind of like that, but this is like a more severe version, because it's obviously very abusive. And I'm not saying that those situations aren't abusive, they definitely can be. So it can be said that during the tension building stage, because there are so many external factors out of the abusive person's control, that this is their way of maintaining a sense of control. So you can already see that this person is a very insecure kind of person, and they need to take out their anger and emotions on somebody else in order to feel like they're in control. And that basically moves us from the tension building stage to the actual incident stage. So the incident stage is essentially where you have the cycle of abuse, becoming more abusive. Essentially, you're having more incidents. This can be violence. It can be, just there. It's basically the abusive partner's way of gaining control and power in the relationship and showing that, oh, I'm the person who's wearing, the pants in the relationship, essentially. So this stage can actually be different for different relationships, and it can include these things. And I'm just reading out some things that I basically have looked at from the internet here. So intimidation, threats of violence, breaking things, throwing things at each other, name calling, insults, verbal violence as well, which is really a way of diminishing a person's self-worth and self-value, making basically showing a lot of contempt towards them, because contempt is when you think that you're morally superior. So you see all these kinds of things. And then you have, of course, physical violence. There can even be sexual violence. There's shaming, blaming, lots of different forms of manipulation. You'll see emotional manipulation, for example, punishing the person because because the abusive person is not getting what they want. So that can include things like, doing gaslighting. Gaslighting is when when someone's saying something, but then at the same time you try to make them feel like everything's just in their head and it's not real. Like you go up to someone and you say something like, remember when XYZ happened? And this is coming from the non-abusive partner, and the abusive partner goes, what are you talking about? This didn't even happen. So you're basically making that person think mentally in their own heads that they're going crazy. That is literally what gaslighting is. Other forms of punishment can be the silent treatment, where they just don't talk to you. They just stonewall, essentially. They don't want to talk to you at all, and you have to go and beg them to have some kind of just apologize, take on all the blame. Essentially what you're doing is you're taking on all the blame and all kinds of things, just to appease the partner and to de-escalate that so that it stops. This can also involve things like humiliation. And one thing you'll see in abusive situations is essentially just, because of the level of control, you'll see them trying to control the partner to the extent of cutting off people in their lives so that they don't actually have any social support except the abusive partner. Like, that is one way of controlling the person. Other forms of abuse can even be financial control, where they essentially try to make the non-abusive partner quit their job, or don't even allow them to get jobs, because again, this makes that non-abusive partner 100% subservient or under the control of the abusive partner. So you also have things like just general emotional mistreatment and making them feel like they have like I said, no worth and value at all. And of course, you will also see in abusive cycles that the abusive partner rarely, if ever, takes any accountability for what they're actually doing. Everything is usually the fault of the non-abusive partner. And it is very hard at this stage to even have a decent conversation with someone who is so comfortable with devaluing and abusing, the other person, and just making them feel like nothing that they say has any value or worth in the eyes of the abusive partner. So that's essentially what you're seeing in this particular stage. So before we go on to the next stage, what I wanted to mention is all those things that I listed out, they are present in this stage, but you may even see versions of what I talked about in the first stage itself. So it's just that it's a more escalated version of what you're seeing in the tension building stage. So it doesn't mean that these things just magically come out in the second stage. No, they can actually be there. But let's just move on to that third stage. So basically, after all these incidents of abuse happen, there's what we call the reconciliation stage. So this is basically when the abusive partner, because they have, they've already behaved in their abusive manner, they start to feel like some of that tension has gone away. They've taken out that behavior already on the non-abusive partner, and unfortunately for the non-abusive partner, they are obviously being traumatized by all of this, right? Because to go through this again and again, and to be constantly being made to feel like you're not worth anything in the relationship, can be very, very traumatizing for someone. And this stage, even though it's called the reconciliation stage, it doesn't feel like there's less tension for the person person who has actually not been, abusing in the relationship. In this stage, the abusive partner may actually start to say things like they're going to change, they're sorry. It's kind of like, they're saying that they're remorseful for the way that they've treated the non-abusive partner, and that they're going to make changes to themselves, all in the hopes of the non-abusive partner giving them chance after chance. And, because of this, they're able to reconcile. So basically, what happens is the abusive partner may even do, like if this is a romantic relationship, they may be doing romantic things at this stage, showering the non-abusive partner with gifts and all the things that the non-abusive partner actually wants in the relationship but has not actually been able to get. And that's why it's called the reconciliation stage, or even the honeymoon phase where everything's going well. And basically that brings on the next stage, that is the calm phase. So the difference between the calm stage and the reconciliation one is that in the calm stage, you're still seeing similar, like reconciliation behaviors, but what happens is, instead of talking about how they are responsible or accountable for their behaviors, it goes to, I'm not actually responsible for this, and I'm actually going to make excuses now for my behavior. That's usually what the abusive partner will do at this point, because what happens is the abusive behaviors are being dismissed. At this stage, they are being dismissed, or they are being minimized. So when you're trying to tell someone, you've done this and it hurts, they'll immediately dismiss that behavior. They start to excuse their behavior and minimize it. Like, what do you mean? Like, this wasn't actually that bad. This is actually a form of abuse. When you're trying to tell someone that the way that their behaviors and words have affected you time and time again, and they minimize it. They act like as if you're the person who's making a big deal out of this, and that you're the only person who's doing this, nobody else is doing it. This is a very, very awful form of being abusive to someone, because you're essentially telling them that the way that you behave doesn't matter, and that you can do whatever you want because it's actually not that bad, and the person to blame is the one who's being non-abusive. So obviously this is a very, very terrible way of going about things. So obviously you're going to see gaslighting here. You're going to see someone making excuses for the behavior. I was tired, I was this, I was that, I was going through blah blah blah. And then you'll also see justification. You may see justification for that behavior, because, oh, you did this last time, so I've decided to do this. So this is essentially a very confusing stage, because your partner actually wants to get things fixed and right, but now there's this weird sense of, I thought that you were taking accountability, but you're actually not really taking accountability. And basically what happens is, again, this moves into the tension stage. So these 4 stages that I've actually gone through with you are based on Lenore E. Walker's research, and there are some criticisms, some changes to all of this now, because cycles of abuse don't necessarily have to be going in this exact order. Some people may not experience some of the stages that are in this cycle of abuse. There's so many new factors now, right? There's things like culture and all kinds of other things that come into play. So we need to be mindful that even when someone is going through the cycle of abuse, they may not actually even know that they're going through the cycle of abuse, because when someone has come from a place of abuse, they may just think that they deserve it. We don't know the reasons why exactly they have managed to get here, but we do know that they're in it, and it's very important to have that empathy and understanding and compassion for that person, because for some reason or the other they may not have found it in themselves to be able to leave. And the thing is that dealing with the cycle of abuse doesn't just mean leaving, because there's a lot more to leaving. It's not easy to leave someone who has been abusing you for a very long time, especially when they've had that much influence and control over your life. It can be a very scary and difficult experience for someone. And something that I have noticed is that when people are in the cycle of abuse, it's also difficult for them to find forms of social support, because the abuser is so keen and so intent on cutting off all forms of social support. They want this person to be 100% reliant on them, because that is their way of controlling them. So you will see this through many different forms of abuse. There can be physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, sarcasm, which is something I really don't like anymore. Is actually, when you're using it in this kind of setting or during fights, it can be an absolute horrifying way to damage a relationship, because it shows, once again, again, contempt, that you feel that you have moral superiority over the other person. But again, in a more extreme case, when you're using it here in abusive relationships, it becomes worse because it's usually coupled with so many other things, you know. I'm not talking about, you know, once in a while you're just messing around with a friend and you get sarcastic. I think that can actually be funny at times, but this is a very harmful kind of sarcasm, which is meant to devalue someone and belittle them and make them feel very small. So when this kind of stuff happens, it's just very, very painful and hurtful for the person who's actually being abused, and it can lead to them having a lot of, you know, emotional baggage, obviously trauma, because it's so hard to cope with what they're going through in the moment. So other forms of abuse can be neglect. For example, you know, if it's a family setting and this is happening between a husband and a wife, you may see, you know, the abusive partner purposely not giving food to their non-abusive partner, forcing them to do things around the house, even though they are physically unable to do so, and then getting angry at them if they're not able to do these things. And it's very difficult to watch someone that you love when they're in an abusive, you know, relationship, being put through all kinds of things that are just so damaging, you know, to human worth and value. In an abusive relationship, there's a lot of control, so they may control them, you know, by putting like apps on their phones or demanding to know where they are at all times. Financial control, like I said, not allowing them to work so that they're 100% reliant again on the abusive partner. I even know cases where they've used governments, you know, like because of immigration, like when people are getting married from 2 different countries and all of that, and someone's trying to get permanent residence in the country, the abusive partner, you know, literally going and stopping people, literally going and putting spokes in the wheel to stop the immigration process so that the person, the non-abusive partner, is not able to work. There are so many forms of abuse that can actually happen, and it is absolutely scary when you think about it, the way that someone can go about to just ruin your life. And, you know, in situations like this. So how do we help someone who's in this? It's really important to recognize that it's not all about, you know, oh, I've told you to leave, so therefore you need to leave. There needs to be an element of compassion and love for this person, and recognizing that they may not know how to do this and they may not have resources. So it's important, of course, if you know someone who's in that cycle and doesn't recognize it, to continue being loving and kind towards them, because it will eventually open their eyes to the reality that not everybody treats them the way that their abusive partner treats them. And I think something that I also want to say is, don't isolate them. Don't give up on the friendship because they're being abused, because this is another thing that, you know, the abusive partner is doing on purpose. They're literally doing this because they want that person to be isolated and controlled. So if you give up on it because you feel like that's overwhelming, in a sense, you are, you know, letting that person win. Not that I'm saying it's your fault, because I do know it's overwhelming. I would say go and get support, go and get help. There are resources in different countries. It's important to have a group of people helping you with this. And, you know, for the person who's in this particular kind of situation, you need to have someone that you can confide in, that you can trust, and who's willing to connect you to different resources, because there are resources available, and it just depends on which country you're in. So many times when you're in situations like this, you may not even have the energy or the time to look after yourself. And this is again so intentional by the abusive partner. They're doing this to make you feel like you are nothing without them, because your whole world now revolves around them and, you know, what they say and what they do. And it's very intentional and purposeful. It is literally their way of just tearing you apart. So it's very important to get help, get therapy, and to start building yourself up by doing things that you enjoy and that you like. I would say try to do at least one thing for yourself, you know, some form of self-care that enables you to get in touch with yourself, and that helps you to kind of just realize that you're a human being and you do deserve, you know, love and respect. Because the more people that you surround yourself with, the more you're going to start realizing that not everybody behaves in the way that this abusive person behaves like. When you've been in this cycle for such a long time, or in this situation for such a long time, to believe that there's nothing better there for you, there's, you know, your life is over, you've spent so much time in the situation. I was actually in an abusive relationship for some time, and I will say this, there is something better out there. There are good people out there. There are better things out there, and you can find people who are genuine and loving and kind, and I feel very blessed that I've met so many people like this who recognize and realize that I really was not in a good place and that I didn't know how to actually handle what I was going through, which is why I was just falling to pieces, literally. But it is possible to rebuild a life and to come back from this and to realize later on that it's just one part of your life and it does not have to define the rest of your life. So before we go, again, I just wanted to say that this is just one theory when it comes to understanding domestic violence. There are actually lots of other theories that are here, but this is probably one that is the most common, and it does explain a little bit about domestic violence, and it gives a basic insight into really like what's happening in relationships like this. But something that's worth noting is, like I said previously, not everybody goes through all of these stages, and sometimes it just goes from, you know, that being nice place to just constant abuse. It just goes on and on and on. There's no, you know, like slowing down. There's no honeymoon phase, essentially. So it's good to just bear that in mind, that someone may just go through constant abuse and there's no remorse and there's nothing, you know, it's just everything going wrong all at once. And it's also important to remember that many times when people try to leave abusive relationships, that's when people get the most violent and they get the most angry. And, you know, there are women who have lost their lives because of things like this. So there's actually no one stage that's, you know, the safest for someone to leave. And if you are someone who's planning to leave, you need to have a very well thought out plan. You need to have resources and someone who's willing to help you, because this needs to be something that you can implement in such a way that you keep yourself safe. And usually in family situations, they may even use the children against, you know, the non-abusive partner. And it's just a very, very tragic situation. Like, learning about things like this, it really opens your eyes to how evil human beings can be. And this is not something that is, you know, normal. A lot of people who are in abusive situations may think that this is normal in relationships, and it's not. It's not normal to devalue, disrespect, and literally just hate your partner in such a evil way that, you know, you feel the need to treat them like they're dirt under your feet. It's just not something that's normal. It's not something that should be encouraged. And, you know, these are like obviously the more extreme forms of abuse, but you can see this in relationships where there's no physical abuse, like platonic relationships. You can see things like emotional and verbal abuse in them, and it can be very, very painful for the person on the receiving end to always feel like they're walking on eggshells and never know how to actually do anything right in this relationship. And this is true even in the more extreme cases. You will constantly be made to feel like nothing you're doing is right, and that's why you're being punished in this way, and you're blamed for everything, and that other person does not take any accountability for anything that is happening. And you, as a person who's being the non-abusive partner, you constantly take the blame because you're trying to appease that person. You're trying to stop that cycle, essentially, you know, from playing out. You don't want to be abused, and that is a sign. It's a sign that actually shows you don't want to be abused. You're only doing this because you just want things to be okay. The cycle of abuse that I just spoke to you about does not talk to you about the strengths of the person who is being non-abusive in the relationship, which is a very important thing, especially when you go to therapy. Your therapist will probably help you to find your strengths, because you do have strengths. Every person has them. And if you're in this situation and you feel like things are hopeless, I just want to remind you that you do have strength. You do have things that make you unique and wonderful and beautiful and loved. And you know, just going through all these awful experiences and having people label you and put you down and make you feel like absolute crap, that does not define you. That actually shows you what the other person is like a lot more than what you are like. You're just in a very difficult place and you need some help, and that's okay. So if you are going through any kind of situation, it may not need to, it doesn't have to be the extreme version that I talked to you about that includes physical, financial, technological control and all these kinds of things. It can even be a basic one, like a friendship. If you're going through stuff like that, working through this in therapy can be very helpful. And something that I have found particularly helpful, because I have had individuals in my life who have been extremely abusive, especially when it comes to them not getting what they want. Having stable friends, like having stable friends and individuals that are able to point things out, especially because usually when you're in situations like this for a long time, you don't take your word for things and you doubt yourself, right? Because you're being gaslit for such a long time. So when you start to see things, it's somehow being glossed over by this other individual. So having other individuals in your life that can support you and point things out, basically call spades spades, having people like that, it makes a world of difference, because you start to realize that this is the only relationship where someone is actually treating you so unkindly and has no respect for you whatsoever. So it's important. So I would say, try and get a social base if you can. Reach out and get some help. Hey everyone, so this is the look that I've created so far. I did want to kind of go in with a bit more highlighter, and I decided to leave that to do with you. So I'm going in again with the High Priestess, which is this shade over here. You can see a bit of that highlighter right on top over here and the inner corners of my eyes, but I didn't put anything over here, so I thought I would just do that right now. I'm just gonna add a little bit there. You can see how blinding that is already. This is the Oracle Chrome Highlighter Palette. I remember picking it up and I have used it a couple of times. I really do like any kind of highlighter palette. They're one of my favorite products and I enjoy, the colors that I get. So if the light hits it from a specific angle, I'm going to get a different, shine from it. So I think that should do it. This is the completed look. And as I told you before, the main palette. So I'm just going to give you the rest of the makeup details that, I probably didn't mention all at once. So I went in with my NYX glitter glue for the, shimmers. I always do this in every single look. It's a staple for me. For my lipstick, I went in with the shade Wild Orchid by Besame Cosmetics. It's a lovely purpley kind of pink shade. It's really beautiful and I love using Besame lipsticks. They're some of my favorites, absolute favorites. And for my eyeliner, which is that right over there, that was a Lakme pencil. And Lakme is a brand from India, which I really love. So it's Lakme Absolute Vibrant Azure. Yeah, that's the shade. If you're ever in India and you want to get makeup, Lakme is definitely one of the best for eyeliners. They're just stunning. You can see how pigmented that eyeliner is over there. And for my eyebrows, I always use my Ulak kit. I absolutely love Ulak Cosmetics, and this is the shade Straw Bun. So this matches my skin tone perfectly. I have other kits in different colors. And if you want to go and check those out, then I hope that you had fun going through this makeup video with me and learning about the cycle of abuse. It's definitely not an easy topic to navigate through or to understand, and I think that a lot of times people who are in the cycle of abuse themselves don't recognize that they're in this cycle of abuse, and it makes it very difficult to actually get out of this cycle because you're being isolated from people. You're being cut off from all the people that can give you support. Usually that's what abusers like to do. They like to take over total control of the person and manipulate them emotionally, whatever ways that they can. And it's usually a slow process, which is why a lot of the times in cycles of abuse, you'll find people saying it didn't start like this. When I first met the person, they were perfectly nice. I really believe that because the process of abuse is so slow, it's easy to actually infiltrate a person's mind psychologically and trick them, manipulate them, gaslight them, make them feel that everything that's going wrong is their fault. And because it started off so well, especially if you yourself have insecurities, it can be very easy to just go along with all of that and accept that, yeah, all of this is in fact my fault. And sometimes it can be more subtle. Abuse doesn't have to be physical. It can also be emotional, verbal, and mental. Anyway, we'll probably dig more into the cycle of abuse in future videos, but something I did want to mention is that I know that I've been doing Therapy Thursdays on a weekly basis, but I'm going to be changing it to, I think, a bi-weekly basis, because I do like to get into a lot of detail, and I feel like I'm able to do more research within 2 weeks than just sharing, what I pick up within 1 week. So yeah. I will see you for the next Therapy Thursday in 2 weeks time, but I do thank you for your support in watching these videos and learning more about psychology and counseling and mind, and I hope that you like the makeup look, of course. So I will see you very soon. If you want to pick up any of the Bella Beauty Bar palettes or the Whoosh Beauty palette, I do have codes which are going to be on the screen, so you can go and get yourselves a discount, and I appreciate every bit of support that I get from you. So thank you so much. I will see you soon for another video, and until then, be safe. Bye.